If you're looking for a shortcut to understanding some really complex global issues, well, you're definitely in the right place.
We try our best.
Today, we're diving deep into Peter Zeihan's book, The Absent Superpower, The Shale Revolution and a World Without America.
Quite a title.
It is. And our mission, really, is to unpack Zeihan's core argument. He basically says that all the seemingly chaotic stuff happening globally, it's actually, in his view, part of a predictable shift.
Yeah, a shift driven fundamentally by America's, energy transformation,
Yeah.
the shale revolution, and then the U.S. kind of stepping back from the world stage.
Exactly. We're going to focus on his key points and the details he uses to back them up.
And it's a really unique perspective you're about to hear. Zeihan, he's a geopolitical strategist, right? He blends insights from all sorts of industries, his private intelligence background. His goal isn't just to say what's happening, but to give you the context, the full picture of how all these global pieces interlock.
He wants you to see the whole board.
Precisely. He even jokes that, for him, change is good for business. And I think after today, you'll start to see why he might say that.
Okay, so let's get into it. Zeihan starts with the basics. Petroleum. He calls it the fuel of modernity. Why such a big claim? We think gas for cars, maybe power plants.
Well, Zeihan's point is it's way, way bigger than just fuel. It's like a fundamental ingredient in almost everything in modern life.
Like what?
Plastics, obviously, your phone, your computer casing, but also synthetic fabrics and clothes, even like chewing gum, kitchen knives, the insulation in your house walls.
Wow, okay.
His argument is basically, without petroleum, our complex supply chains, the whole way we live now, just wouldn't work. It'd unravel.
And the American shale revolution completely changed the game with this stuff. He has this great analogy, ravioli versus lasagna, to explain the difference between old school drilling and shale. How does that work?
Right, it's a good one. Think of conventional drilling the old way, like poking a hole and hitting a big underground pool of oil or gas. One self-contained pocket, like drilling into a single ravioli. You get one big hit if you're lucky.
Okay.
Shale, though, is different. The oil and gas are trapped in layers of rock, spread out over huge areas, like the layers of meat, cheese, and pasta in lasagna.
Ah, got it.
So you have to drill down, then turn sideways, horizontally, sometimes for miles, and then fracture the rock, that's the fracking part, to release all these little bits of trapped petroleum.
So you're not hitting one big pocket, you're accessing loads of tiny ones spread throughout the rock layers.
Exactly. And this is key, Zeihan says, because it lets us get at the maybe 80 to 90% of all petroleum that's not in those convenient ravioli pockets.
Yeah.
It's trapped in the source rock itself.
And the U.S. shale fields are incredibly diverse, aren't they?
Yeah.
Not all the same stuff.
Not at all. You've got fields like the Bakken in North Dakota, that's almost pure oil. Then the Haynesville down in Louisiana, Texas, that's almost all natural gas.
Right.
And then places like the Marcellus in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, it's a complex mix. Plus, each area has its own, geological headaches, like hard chert rock in Oklahoma's Woodford or tricky clay in Colorado's Niobrara. It's complicated stuff.
So dealing with all that complexity, how did the U.S. industry adapt so quickly? Zeihan seems almost surprised by it himself.
Yeah, he notes how the American shale sector matured far faster and more holistically than even he expected. And this was despite big oil price crashes and, a lot of opposition early on. This super fast learning curve, he argues, led to what he calls a second shale revolution.
Mm.
And this is what's fundamentally reshaping America's industrial base and really the whole global geopolitical picture for, decades.
And the core idea being, because we figured this out so fast.
It suddenly didn't need the rest of the world's energy in the same way. It untethers the U.S., fundamentally.
Okay, so how did they actually do that? Zeihan talks about specific technologies that drove down the costs. What were the big ones?
There were several key things. First, they figured out how to drill much longer horizontal sections, the laterals. So one drill pad could reach way more rock.
Instead of drilling lots of vertical wells.
Exactly. Cheaper, less surface impact. Then came what he calls the microseismic revolution. Using sensors to listen to the fracking process, they realized something crucial. 80-20 rule. Turns out, maybe only 20% of the frac stages were producing 80% of the oil or gas. And, get this, over half the stages might produce basically nothing.
Wow. So a lot of effort was wasted.
Totally. So knowing that, they could be much smarter. They started infilling, drilling new, better-placed wells on old pads, and also refracking, going back to old wells and applying the newer, better technique.
And I remember reading about the sliding sleeve. That was a big deal too, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The sliding sleeve technology, while newer back then, was like a quantum leap in efficiency. It lets operators open or close specific sections within the long horizontal pipe.
So they can target exactly where to frack or refrack.
Precisely. At any point. Zeihan highlights how this tech means you could reliably triple a well's long-term output for maybe less than a 50% cost increase. It's huge.
Incredible. And that's what crushed the cost.
That's what plummeted the per barrel costs. He shows how it went from needing maybe $90 a barrel in 2012 to break even, then to around $40 a barrel in 2016. Suddenly, U.S. shale was cost competitive with Saudi oil. Game changer.
Like you said, there were price crashes. And Zeihan points out this efficiency boom had a downside, right? The other side of shale.
Yeah, there's always another side. He calls it a recession in the energy production input sector.
Meaning?
Well, if each rig, each worker becomes massively more productive, you just don't need as much stuff. Less demand for steel pipe, for fracking sand, for chemicals, even for workers in the long run. The big construction boom, building all the pipelines and pads and processing plants, that's largely over. So the demand for those inputs, as Zeihan argues, isn't coming back to peak levels.
And this super cheap U.S. energy just crushed competitors, didn't it?
Devastated them. Shale natural gas, for instance. Zeihan calculates it's roughly a third the cost of conventional gas from other North American sources.
Ouch.
Yeah, it hit Canadian producers Alberta really hard. And the offshore drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. Output, he says, dropped by about half from 2010 levels. Just couldn't compete on cost.
So bringing it back home, you mentioned the third shale revolution. What does Zeihan say this means for, the average person listening?
Right, so the third revolution is the consequence.
Yeah.
The U.S. is now producing oil and natural gas at historical highs. And Zeihan argues this translates directly into savings for American families.
How much?
His calculation was an average family of 4 saves about $1,100 a year on gasoline compared to what they would have paid otherwise, plus another $750 a year on electricity, thanks to cheaper natural gas power.
That's actually pretty significant, nearly $2,000 a year.
It's a real boost to household budgets, directly tied to this shale boom, in his view.
Which raises the question, why America? Lots of countries have shale rock. Why did the U.S. crack the code? Zeihan emphasizes some unique factors.
He really does. First, just the sheer scale of the U.S. continent. Unmatched geography for this kind of thing. Second, he points to America's historical knack for perfecting industrial processes. We're good at figuring out complex, iterative stuff.
Like the assembly line applied to geology?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Then there's the geology itself. We happen to have prime basins. But critically, he highlights the unique skill set of U.S. petroleum engineers. They had to integrate geology, chemistry, engineering on the fly, learning by doing, because there was no manual.
And the final piece.
Maybe the most uniquely American part.
Yeah.
Private ownership of mineral rights. Almost everywhere else in the world, the government owns what's underground.
Right.
In the U.S., if you own the land, you often own the minerals beneath it. So landowners get royalties. That creates this massive incentive for investment and innovation that just doesn't exist in most other places. It fuels the whole thing.
Okay, so putting all these pieces together, the tech, the cost, the geology, the mineral rights, what's Zeihan's big conclusion about America and energy?
His core point, the foundation for the rest of the book really, is that the United States no longer is tied to global energy markets. We don't need the world's oil in the same way. And that independence, he argues, changes absolutely everything about America's role in the world.
Which leads us directly into demographics and what Zeihan calls the coming disorder. He breaks down populations into groups, right? Young workers, mature workers, retirees.
Yeah, it's a useful framework. Young workers spend, take on debt, drive consumption. Mature workers are capital rich, they save and invest. Retirees, well, they start drawing down resources, consuming pensions and healthcare. The balance matters.
And he looks at the U.S. baby boomers and millennials. The boomers' investment choices, he says, drove financial bubbles.
Right, chasing yield as they aged. But then you have the millennials, Gen Y. He calls them the best educated generation. They're hitting their peak consumption years now, and eventually there'll be a large tax-paying base, which he thinks makes future U.S. budgets actually look more manageable than people expect.
But the picture globally is starkly different, according to Zeihan.
Dramatically different. Outside the U.S., sure, they also had big boomer generations and smaller Gen X cohorts. But the key difference, Zeihan hammers this home, if only the American boomers had kids in large enough numbers.
So millennials are a uniquely large cohort in the U.S. compared to other developed nations.
Relatively speaking, yes. Most advanced economies, and even places like China, basically saw birth rates collapse after a certain point. They didn't have that large follow-on generation.
And the result?
In Zeihan's frankly chilling words, is accelerating population falls unparalleled in speed and depth by any peacetime event in human history, with the singular exception of the Black Plague. That's happening across many advanced economies right now.
Wow. That's quite a statement. The Black Plague.
It really grabs your attention, doesn't it? But it highlights the scale of the demographic collapse he sees unfolding.
So what's the critical takeaway from combining the energy independence and these demographic shifts?
The takeaway for Zeihan is that America's transformation energy, demographics, finance, it's largely internal. It makes the U.S., in his view, largely immune to international developments.
Okay.
But the changes happening outside the U.S., those are often caused by these American shifts, especially the withdrawal aspect. So global stability becomes, as he puts it, hostage to a country that no longer sees a link between its own economic and security well-being and that of the rest of the world.
We don't need them, but they still need us, or at least the stability we used to provide.
That's the core tension he identifies. And this leads directly to his forecast for conflict, what he calls the wars of the disorder.
Right. With the U.S. disengaging, pulling back troops, he mentions lows not seen since 1941.
Yeah, significant drawdown.
He predicts that for many nations struggling with shrinking economies, aging populations, and no American security blanket, war will be the only path forward.
It's a bleak forecast, but it follows logically from his premises about resource competition and security vacuums.
And he outlines 3 major conflicts he saw coming. Let's start with the first, the Twilight War in Russia. It starts with Russia's geography, right? Just wide open, hard to defend.
Very hard, very expensive. Flat, vast borders. Always been their strategic challenge.
And compounding that is the demographic picture you mentioned earlier.
Oh, absolutely crucial for Russia. Post-Cold War, Zeihan details a catastrophic demographic collapse. Birth rates plummeted, healthcare systems fell apart, addiction soared.
So fewer young people.
Way fewer. He actually predicted that by 2022, the Russian army, in terms of functional manpower, would likely be no more than half its 2010 size. Just not enough healthy young men to sustain it, a critical vulnerability.
So given that weakness, how does Zeihan explain Moscow's strategy? Why expand if you're weak?
His logic is, because they're weak, they have to expand now to grab more defensible borders before the demographic crunch gets even worse. Shorten the lines, control the access points.
Starting with Ukraine.
Starting with Ukraine, exactly. Whose military, Zeihan claimed back then, had been gutted, leaving the path to Kiev relatively open in his assessment. He also points to Brexit.
How does Brexit fit in?
He argues it inadvertently helps Russia by weakening the Western response. The EU is distracted, the UK is focused inward. It muddies the waters for a unified front supporting Ukraine.
Interesting. But there's one country Zeihan says really worries Russia in that region.
Turkey. Definitely Turkey. He says Turkish power keeps Russian planners up at night.
Right.
Why? Turkey controls the Bosphorus Strait, access out of the Black Sea. It has a powerful navy in the Black Sea and large ground forces right there.
A major obstacle.
A huge one. And Zeihan interprets Russia's heavy involvement in the Syrian conflict partly as a strategic distraction, a way to tie up Turkish attention and resources away from the Black Sea and Ukraine. Okay, that's Russia. The second big conflict Zeihan predicts, the Gulf War, specifically Saudi Arabia versus Iran. This is a classic rivalry, but he says the U.S. kept a lid on it.
Yeah, for decades, U.S. presence basically prevented an all-out fight. With the U.S. stepping back, Zeihan sees it devolving into a, quote, back alley knife fight that could easily spiral.
And how does he rate the two powers against each other?
He gives Saudi Arabia the edge. He talks about their strategic insulation, basically being harder to attack directly, having a fatter checkbook, and a bigger, more reliable income stream from oil. Iran he sees as strategically and economically overextended.
So what's the Saudi strategy in this fight, according to Zeihan?
Two-pronged, he argues. First, controversially, he claims they actively exported Islamist militants groups like al-Qaeda and even the early Islamic State initially as tools to bog down rivals, including Iran and its proxies.
Wow. Okay. And the second part?
Checkbook diplomacy. Using their oil wealth to fund proxies and allies, buying influence and countering Iranian moves across the region. So how would Iran fight back in this scenario? Zeihan mentions the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, the choke point for a huge amount of global oil. Iran's play, he predicts, would be to try and shut it down. Use swarms of small boats, mines, maybe some ballistic and dumb missiles, basically, asymmetrical warfare to disrupt shipping.
Could they succeed?
They could cause chaos, definitely. But Zeihan points out a major vulnerability for Iran. Their main oil export terminal, Karg Island, is a big, fat, stationary target. very vulnerable to Saudi air power.
And Saudi Arabia would hit back hard.
Oh, yeah. Zeihan predicts they'd specifically target Iran's oil-rich Khuzestan province, the heartland of its production. An attack there could take Iranian crude offline for years, crippling their economy.
Would other countries get involved? What about the U.S.?
He suggests Asian navies, desperate for oil, might try to intervene to keep Hormuz open. But the U.S. Zeihan thinks Washington would likely stay out, preferring to let the two regional rivals bleed each other in a grinding desert stalemate. Let them fight it out.
Grim. Okay, third major conflict, the East Asian tanker war. Why is this region so vulnerable?
It comes down to energy dependence again. Northeast Asia, China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, they import a massive amount of oil, mostly from the Persian Gulf. He puts the figure around 19 million barrels per day, something like 75% of their needs coming from outside their region.
So if the Gulf goes up in flames,
Their economies are incredibly vulnerable. The sea lanes carrying that oil become potential war zones, hence the tanker war.
Now, you'd think Japan, with its aging population and economic stagnation, would be in deep trouble here. But Zeihan sees surprising strength.
He does. Despite the demographics, he stresses Japan remains a technological and industrial superpower, especially when it comes to maritime tech and shipbuilding.
And their navy.
Very capable. He highlights their Izumo-class helicopter carriers, noting they could potentially be converted to operate F-35 jets. So Japan, in his view, has the capacity to sail the long way, go around Africa if needed, and protect its own shipping to secure oil, a level of self-sufficiency China lacks.
So let's talk about China's vulnerabilities then. What are they?
They're significant, according to Zeihan. First, huge dependence on international trade, maybe 40–50% of their economy tied to it. Very vulnerable to shipping disruptions.
Okay.
Second, a fractured geography. The political power base is in the north, but the economic engine and deep water ports are all along the southern coast. Hard to coordinate and defend.
And their navy isn't up to projecting power globally yet.
Not even close, in Zeihan's assessment back then. Not capable of securing long sea lanes all the way to the Persian Gulf. Plus, they're heavily reliant on coal for domestic energy, which isn't easily replaced if imports get cut off. Lots of vulnerabilities.
He also zooms in on Southeast Asia, the countries along those vital sea lanes. Who does he see as winners and losers there?
It's a mixed bag. He points to Vietnam, with its historical antagonism towards China and its strategic naval base at Cam Ranh Bay, as a potential spoiler. The Philippines, having lost U.S. backing, he sees facing a tough future. Malaysia's oil fields in the Natuna Sea are right in a potential conflict zone.
So those are facing challenges. Who might benefit?
He identifies Singapore as likely to thrive. It's an economic powerhouse, strategically located, with a strong military. Indonesia has potential, especially with major Western oil companies like Chevron and ExxonMobil already operating there. And Thailand, often neutral, could become a hub for refining and essentially war profiteering by selling fuel products to all sides.
Okay, so after painting this picture of global conflict zones, what's the American play in all this disorder? Zeihan uses that phrase, reach without interests, capacity without commitment, corporate without government. Break that down.
Right, it captures the new mode of U.S. engagement. Corporate without government refers to the U.S. energy supermajors ExxonMobil, Chevron. He describes them as these incredible concentrations of capital, tech, logistics, skilled labor.
Mm-hmm.
In a chaotic world where governments are failing, these massive, flexible corporations become very attractive partners for resource development. They can bring everything needed, but crucially, they can also just walk away if things get too risky. They aren't tied down like a state actor.
Private power filling the vacuum, and capacity without commitment. That sounds like the military.
Exactly. He argues the U.S. military is shifting away from large-scale occupations and ground wars. The focus moves towards special operations forces, SOFs, and drones.
Smaller footprint, less entanglement.
Precisely. Smaller, more precise actions, often beyond the view of the general public. Maintaining the ability to intervene powerfully, but without the open-ended commitment of past interventions. Reach without the same old interest driving.
And how does this disorder affect global trade supply chains?
Zeihan predicts a major shift away from those long, complex, multi-country supply chains we got used to. With rising transport costs and collapsing security, manufacturing will become more localized, clustered.
Bringing production closer to home, or at least to safer regions.
Yes. And underpinning all this, he emphasizes the U.S. dollar. In a chaotic world, it becomes the only truly credible international store of value. This drives huge capital flight towards the U.S., especially from places like Europe and China facing demographic and security crises, which, ironically, further strengthens the U.S. economy.
So where does this dollar diplomacy, as he calls it, actually play out? He identifies specific regions, Latin America first.
Yeah, he sees Latin America as basically an American exclusion zone. Why? Because there's no security resistance from within and no real competition from outside powers like Europe or China anymore. The U.S. is the only game in town.
And there's an energy angle, too.
Big time. He predicts a massive oil windfall for Latin American exporters as global supplies tighten maybe an extra $100 per barrel. Now, he admits this will likely worsen inequality within those countries, but it creates huge opportunities for U.S. companies to invest and partner. He mentions Venezuela's struggles, Brazil's potential with Petrobras, and Argentina's promising shale reserves.
Okay, Latin America. Then he points to Southeast Asia again, but this time as an opportunity. He says their topographic weaknesses become strengths. What's that mean?
Well, the same mountains and jungles that historically kept them from fighting each other also make them less suitable for large-scale conventional invasion. In a world of insecure sea lanes, he sees potential for these countries, with U.S. help, to develop new, shorter, more secure manufacturing supply chains, leveraging their labor costs and proximity.
Interesting flip. And the last region, the most surprising one for dollar diplomacy.
Coastal southern China. It sounds counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But his argument is that these coastal cities are deeply integrated into the global economy. They rely on foreign partners for money, for food, for energy, and crucially for security, especially, he suggests. If they face pressure or breakdown from their own former central government in Beijing, they'll need reliable partners, and U.S. corporations fit the bill.
So a potential fragmentation within China itself opens the door.
That's the scenario he lays out, leading to his rather blunt conclusion about energy.
Which is?
That essentially, the world is just going to have to get by without most of the oil that this region, the Persian Gulf, has traditionally supplied for a good long time. A fundamental reshaping of energy flows.
Wow. Okay, what a sweeping and frankly quite stark vision of the future Zeihan lays out. So the central thesis is clear. America steps back thanks to energy and demographics, and the result is this global disorder, wars, potential famines, national breakdowns spreading across much of the Eastern Hemisphere.
That's the core. But there's a final twist, a provocative thought he leaves us with, straight from the book.
Go on.
He doesn't see this American withdrawal as permanent. He calls it a 20 to 30-year hiatus, a period where the rest of the world, well, breaks down after that.
What happens after that?
He contends the United States will re-engage. It will return to a world stage where it is, quote, far more powerful relative to the rest of the world than it is in 2016. And then the U.S. will, in his words, impose some new order on a chaotic world.
Impose a new order. So the question he leaves hanging is, what kind of order will that be? And what will that mean for all of us?
Exactly.